Amber, how did you meet Noam, and when did you realize she would make an interesting subject for a film?
I've actually known Noam for many, many years. I was living in Ramallah while I was making my first feature film, which is called Speed Sisters. And Noam was often in Ramallah hanging out with some Palestinian friends of hers. And we had a lot of mutual friends. And we became friends and spent a lot of time together. And then and at the time, she was working for the United Nations. And I made the film and then moved to the US, and Noam left the United Nations and started, and I saw online that she was, doing sort of satirical skits and little stand-up shows and stuff like that. And then she got this fellowship to go to the Peace and Divinity School at Harvard, and came through Brooklyn where I was living, and we caught up, and she explained to me that she was making, creating this one woman comedy show called Coexistence My Ass, and drawing from, her life growing up in that village. And I just thought it was a, as somebody that's done many films about the region, I just thought it was a interesting way in. And I picked up my camera and I went to Boston the next weekend and started filming. And that was November 2019, when I first went to Boston.
And how
That
did
scene
she
at the
react?
shoe with John Harvard is the
Yeah,
first scene that Amber actually filmed. So
right.
there's
How
always
how did
something nice about when a film begins with the very first scene that was shot as it
Yeah.
was made.
yeah, how did she react to your suggestion to make her the subject of the film?
Oh, I mean, she didn't hesitate at all. She thought it was great. I mean, we were friends. She was a big fan of Speed Sisters, which was my first film. She knew me. Both of us were also friends with Rachel. So so I called Rachel up and was like, Rachel, can you help out with this? And it was a pandemic. Rachel and her partner Philippe, who's an amazing cinematographer. Rachel's a fantastic director in her own right, had nothing to do. So they were like,
Nothing
yeah, let's
better to
do this.
do.
Yeah, they had nothing better to do. It was COVID. Nothing was happening. But none of us really knew where the film was going.
And Rachel, you also worked on the film in a creative way, not just as someone who put the financing in place. Can you describe what you brought to the film?
I mean, for a period, I was, the person here in the field next to Noam. So I was the one who would sort of manage the shooting days, but I would always do it in consultation with Amber. We would talk the night before or that morning about what it was we were sort of looking to get out of a scene or a situation, and then we would debrief almost as soon as it had, as a day had been completed or a shoot had been completed, so that we can sort of assess what are we getting, what are we not getting, what's working more, what's working less. And so Amber and I were just in continuous kind of creative logistical dialogue about like how to go about making the film. It was about a year and a half before Amber could actually physically be in the same place as Noam again. It wasn't until June 2021 that we were all reunited in the same place at the same time. And that was really important because they could connect again. Amber could do some of her intimate one-on-one shooting with Noam. And there was also, Amber's part in the film. She knows Israel-Palestine extremely well, but she's not a Hebrew speaker or an Arabic speaker. So she would ask for things to be made a little bit more clear so that everybody could access them, even if they're complex ideas. And that was extremely important because I could have sort of just gotten lost in internal logic of speaking Hebrew and thinking about, what all was going on. So I think we really balanced each other out in that way. And another person who really brought an incredibly important balance to that was the editor of the film, Rabab Hajihya, who's a Palestinian citizen of Israel. And Rabab speaks Arabic, obviously, also speaks Hebrew incredibly well, obviously speaks English. And so we were able to really balance out our sensibilities in a way that made the film accessible and meaningful for a lot of different audiences.
The film is told chronologically, except for the show that serves as something like a red thread in the film, where she's wearing a dark costume, and it appears in the beginning and at various places in the film, and you only understand that this is filmed after October 7 when the film's chronology actually reaches October 7. Was this the editor's idea to put it like that, or how did this structure develop?
We Noam, as we're filming the film, Noam's also developing this comedy show. So that was kind of happening in tandem. So the jokes, some of the jokes were jokes from when she first got into comedy. Other jokes had been developed along the way. But so we always knew from the beginning that it was this idea of like, let's use this comedy show almost in replace of interviews. There's not a sit down interview in the film. Instead, it's Noam sort of telling her life through her comedy, because her comedy is so incredibly personal.
Obviously, October 7 and the whole aftermath with the genocide in Gaza are defining the narration of the film as it is now. But when you started, you must have had a completely different film in mind. What did you think how you would rep the film, how it would come full circle?
I I don't think I ever knew where the film was going to go. I just knew that there was a character who was saying something interesting that a lot of that is and new for a lot of people. And I knew Noam, I knew her heart, and she was funny. And I know that, I knew these things about her, and I just thought that she'd be a really good character. I can't say that over the 5 years that we filmed, I don't think anyone could predict what had happened. I don't think anyone could predict, that COVID would happen, that all of these events in Israel would lead up to, October 7th happening. And so I think that as we were making the film, there was always this, but you do know, if you're making a film that is about Israel-Palestine, that there are going to be politics that come into play. So I think what we were doing throughout was, you know, looking at Noam and her comedy career, like, can she be, after she had to go back to Israel Palestine, can she be a comedian there? Like, what kind of comedy can she? So there was a thread of following her sort of, her career as a comedian. And then there was the thread of her personal life, as to like her family, the expectations of her family, wanting to get married, all of these things. And so that was a thread. And then we always knew there was a political element of it. And it was just sort of figuring out the balance and how the three things sort of interacted with each other. And the film just sort of organically changed from there. But the essence of the film of, this woman who is Israeli, grew up in this special village and used comedy to really push people to think past the normal structure of Israel Palestine, was always true throughout. Like, that never changed. It's just about where that was going to take us.
So that's the moment when Noam is being attacked for not immediately reacting to what happened on October 7. And she actually says that it's important to think before you react, which is kind of the opposite of what comedy does. Comedy triggers an immediate reaction. And you feel for a moment, maybe this is a moment when comedy is no longer possible. There's this very fine line between comedy and tragedy. You cannot really portray a comedian if she doesn't have to put her own work into question from time to time. And she really does at that moment. Was there ever the notion of I can't go on, comedy is not the right thing in a situation like this?
Yeah, and I think you see that in the film, as you said, as things started to become more dire, that Noam didn't feel that comedy was the right vehicle for her. But I also want to stress that, Noam also says that in that time, I think a lot there was, comedians that she had shared stages with in Israel were now using comedy to on TikTok videos. They were using comedy to entertain troops before they went into Gaza. So like, it really depends on I guess where you stand on an issue as to whether comedy is right or wrong, because comedy can be used at any time. It just, I guess it depends on your own moral compass, perhaps.
Yeah.
For Noam, she wasn't able to use comedy at that point, but
I think it's also important to stress that, and I don't know who to credit with this observation. It's not mine. I'm recycling it, but that comedy either tends to hit up or hit down, hit those above you or hit those below you, and it kind of says everything about the kind of human being you are, not just the kind of comedian you are. If you take shots at the more powerful or if you take shots at the more powerless. And Noam's comedy obviously speaks for itself as one that aligns itself with the oppressed. It's a comedy of solidarity. And so, in the moment where there was absolutely nothing to laugh about, there was nothing to laugh about. But if anybody knows how to laugh, it's the oppressed. And if anybody knows how to laugh in the case of Israel-Palestine, it's the Palestinians. We were also slow to respond to the reality formed after October 7th and the genocidal war in Gaza. It took us a while to understand where do we go from here alongside Noam until we all started to understand that there was something that needed to be articulated as it is articulated in the very last scene of the film.
Noam performs in front of very different audiences. Sometimes they're totally mixed, but sometimes they're mostly Arabs. Sometimes they're North American audiences that are mixed. Sometimes they're Israeli. And she says the Jewish Israeli are the hardest audience because they still have to learn what the Palestinians already understand. And so if the humor needs that context, she has to create the context first. I found that a very interesting statement, and I wonder how she deals with these very different expectations and predispositions in the different audiences that she performs for.
I mean, in the United States, I know that she felt and has always felt a little bit freer to say what she wants to say, a little bit more interest in her and her message. And I think that's across, all Americans, including Jewish Americans.
I mean, I saw her perform in front of mixed audiences, and it's beautiful because she can work the audience in the most wonderful ways. A little bit in Hebrew, a little bit in Arabic. She can tease everybody, but the dynamics are really kind of the nicest when she has a mixed audience because it brings out all of what she is. Part Ashkenazi, part Sephardi, Arabic speaking, Palestinian identified, in many ways. So not identified like she identifies as, but she identifies with. And so those are the best shows, I think, when she is in front of almost exclusively Arabic speaking audiences, Palestinian audiences. She can be a little bit naughtier about what she has to say about Israeli society, and it's and it's built-in contradictions and problems, and the problems are many. And I think when she's only in front of Israeli Jews, she finds her way, but she struggles a little bit more because it's almost like if that audience was in a better had a better consciousness, her comedy wouldn't be as necessary, her critical comedy. But with that said, we've screened the film now in Israel-Palestine in various places, and the receptivity on the part of Jewish Israeli audiences, who are not mainstream audiences, but nevertheless these audiences exist, is incredible. And people not only relate to what she's saying, they feel that in many ways we managed to encapsulate for them and portray for them what their last 5 years have been, 6 years now. And they feel seen.
She says that the Oasis of Peace was a failure, and yet she seems oddly attached to what this upbringing made her, even though she makes fun of the word coexistence. I think that's what she ultimately wants. Can you talk about how the film addresses these two seemingly contradicting ideas?
Yeah, I think that, words like coexistence, peace, I mean, it's not like who doesn't want these things, but those words are quite empty unless there's actual movement and action behind them. And so I think what Noam is saying is that of course she likes coexistence, and she's, if anyone, has seen what coexistence could possibly be. But until, you know, until they're ready, until people are really ready to dismantle or to address the structures that are keeping everyone's so unequal. Like unless they're fighting for equality and justice for everybody, then it's going to end up in this place of
Make believe.
of make believe, and I think that's really what Noam is saying. But at the same time, it's probably the best place to be if you're going to be in that, if you're going to be there, So Noam still, realizes and often says, everything that she is saying, she has learned from her Palestinian neighbors and friends and educators. And that if you are listening to what she's saying, then we really need to be listening to what Palestinians have been telling us for years. So, I still think that for Noam, she's grateful every day that she was raised in that situation. It provided her with a perspective that not many people have, and she's very grateful for it. But at the same time, realizes that it needs to be more than just like putting, Israelis and Palestinians in a room and telling them to talk and call and then slap on coexistence.
In the previous screenings that you had with the films, were people ever confused as to who made this film? Israelis and Palestinians together, Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews or Mizrahi, and Palestinian Americans. And I mean, people are used to a very simple and standard point of view. Was the audience ever asking you, but what do you think? Why did you make the film?
No,
No.
we've never had that. We've never had that question. And I would actually, I think that it's so easy to put us into these boxes as to like our identity. With this film, we came we came from very different places. In some ways, Rachel grew up in the States. I grew up in Canada, right? Like I lived in the Middle East. Rachel moved there as a child. Rabab actually grew up there and then moved to the States. Like we've all had very different we all carry very different identities. But the one thing between all of us is our politic was always the same. There was no difference in the politic that we held while we were making this film. And I think it's really special that it's three women from very different backgrounds that are behind this film. And none of us, probably subscribe to any sort of stereotyping that, in the boxes that people would want to put us in. And I think that is, and I think that that's also a model for what any place should be like.
In that
What do
sense,
you
we're a good reflection for, of Noam, like sort of the team that was built around her portrayal in many ways holds many of the parts of all that she carries and contains. And she makes it really clear that that simultaneity is entirely possible and even desirable. And we seem to be able to replicate that in the constellation of people around the film. I'll also mention two of the other cinematographers, Amit Chachamov, who's Iraqi, Israeli Jew, Philip Beleish, who's North African, Tunisian, Moroccan, French Jew. So we were somehow able to hold a lot of what Noam is. And just as much as Noam makes perfect sense to us, even if she's, considered by some to be a unicorn, we made sense to ourselves as a creative constellation.
and what would you like to take what would you like audience to take away from the film?
I think what has happened in Israel Palestine has really, I mean, I don't think that we can look at what's going on in our countries and not think about how it is impacting what is happening, that this is not only happening in the Middle East anymore, that this is something, I'm in the US right now and watching what is happening in Minnesota, and to see the same sort of tactics and ammunition. And, it looks very familiar to me because I witnessed that in Palestine, and that, we are being held in like such polarization, and that the same, that we really need to come together and fight against this, like this wave of fascism that is taking over the world right now, and that there's a different way forward. And I think that Noam really embodies that, and that everybody needs to participate. We all need to do what we within the means that we have to make a change and to fight for each other.
I would add to that in terms of German audiences that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are what we call in the US kissing cousins, and they're two sides of the very same coin, if not the same side. And if you're concerned with anti-Semitism, you should be equally concerned with Islamophobia and specifically with anti-Palestinian um, eh, attitudes and politics and policies, because Palestine isn't just a Jewish-Israeli question, it's also a German question by virtue of it being a historical domino, and it's also an international community question or problem. It's also not so complicated, and it's also not so complex. It may be complicated for this specific audience, but if you can take away the understanding that the simultaneity that Noam is able to hold culturally, linguistically, politically, personally is possible, and you see that and you're inspired by that, take that to heart and take it to mind that similarly you can hold the battle against anti-Semitism and the battle against Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian sentiments, and that they have to be married and understood as part and parcel of the same issue. We have to remind the audiences what Noam always reminds the audiences. Just because you might feel more comfortable hearing it from me, an Israeli Jew, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be listening to Palestinian voices. Palestinians have been talking about these issues from day one for decades, and they lead in the critique of the situation in Israel-Palestine. And we can lend our voices to that. We can share in the critique and we can have something to say about it, but let Palestinian voices lead and don't make do with hearing it only through an Israeli Jewish filter.
Slash American.